Thank you. So while the panellists come up, and I'm shortly going to ask them to introduce themselves in a length of no more than a tweet, I'll just tell you a bit about myself and an initial response to an excellent report. So for those that don't know me, I am the Chief Education Advisor at TES, at TES. I have been a schools minister for 3 years. I have been an employment minister, and I'm a member of the House of Lords. And when I joined the Lords, having had that experience of doing schools and then employment, I reflected on really how we got on, particularly as by then we were out of office and the other side were telling everyone how rubbish we were. And so you do question whether or not we really were rubbish. And you realise how distracted I realised how distracted I was by all sorts of things that the machine gets you to worry about, and how probably there wasn't enough focus on the thing that really makes a difference, which is, education is a people business, and the thing that makes a difference is teaching. And, I like to think we did some good things for teaching. We paid them some more and we recruited a few more in and, that kind of thing. But what I'm really happy to be doing now at TES is focusing on teachers and teaching. And one of the things I've been doing the last year or year and a half is developing some online professional development with them. And I'm happy that we're working with the National Science Learning Centres around some of that over this next year. But in doing so, the messages that are in these 5 lessons in this report really chime for me. I know from the people that have done the initial courses that we've done, that those that go in and try and get through the course really quickly are the ones that express dissatisfaction when we survey them at the end. Those that take their time and enjoy the collaborative nature of the discussion and want to learn from each other rather than just extract content and regurgitate it are the ones that really get a lot out of it. So that sustained, collaborative, networked CPD is such a strong message that comes out of this report. Obviously well led. And then the final thing before everyone introduces themselves, I'd say, is obviously the other thing that we see at TES very clearly is what's going on in the world of the teacher workforce, because we seem to play a role in people getting jobs as teachers. Something like 75% of teachers and 95% of secondary heads get employed through TES. And so we see what Nick Gibb describes as the challenge of hiring teachers right now. And I absolutely see the impact of significant under-recruitment into teacher training at the moment. Physics, I think 67% recruited last time. And I don't think there's enough discussion of retention. So I'm delighted, I know it's difficult to evidence it, and Yvonne mentioned that, but it seems logical to me that if we are managing and investing in people's development as professionals, then they are more motivated, they're more excited about doing the job, and then they can communicate about the exciting possibilities in careers. Now, we have an excellent panel of 7 people. You've all arranged yourselves as instructed according to the nameplates, and not everyone can see the nameplate. So starting at the end, if you'd like to just give your tweet-length introduction so we know who you are, that would be perfect, please.
Fantastic. So I'm Pippa Morgan, and I head up Early Years and Education Policy at the CBI, so the Confederation of British Industry Business Lobby Group.
Brilliant. Good morning. I'm Jen Plews. I'm head teacher of Skipton Girls High School. I'm co-founder of Northern Star Academies Trust, and I run Northern Lights Teaching School Alliance.
Hi, I'm Claire Mattison. I'm Director of Strategy here at the Wellcome Trust, and I guess you could say, along with a couple of other people in this room, the founder of the National Science Learning Centre.
Hi, I'm Pauline Hoyle. I'm the Associate Director at My Science, and my background is from teaching and advisory and working with schools and with teachers on CPD over many years.
And I'm Brian Cartwright. I'm one of Her Majesty's Inspectors of Schools, and I'm responsible for science within Ofsted.
Congratulations on not booing on the Ofsted.
Wakefield. I'm Corporate Citizenship Manager at IBM UK. I have a long-standing engagement and involvement in STEM education. I originally trained as a teacher, but I'm one of those people that fell out of that very leaky pipeline right at the beginning.
Morning, I'm Carolyn Robson. I'm Executive Head of Rushmead School in Leicester, which is a teaching school. I'm also currently the Vice Chair of the Teaching Schools Council, who are meeting today, and I've got to hop across to that later on. And I also chair the Design and Technology Expert Subject Group, although I'm a geographer, and you can make of that what you like.
I'm a geographer.
Oh, well, there we are. Great.
So, geography is also a way of understanding the world too. Barak. Okay. Let me just start with a question to you as a panel. And yeah, generally, I think pitch in. Politely interrupt each other if you feel you need to. Yeah, we want this to be lively. If anybody else has a burning need to say something, stick your hand up and I'll try and notice and play it in. I want this to be relatively informal. We'll take through till about 10 past 12, I think is the plan, that we should be about 45 minutes. So let's start with, what do we think a well-rounded STEM education really is? Science, technology, engineering and maths. Do they all get their fair share? We're obsessed by maths. Do all four of those get a look in? Ofsted, when you inspect, Brian, what are you looking for in a well-rounded STEM education?
The classic is broad and balanced and making sure young people are well prepared for their next stage in education. But if there is a Cinderella subject in schools, it is engineering. That word doesn't appear, generally speaking, pre-16. One of the strengths of the National Science Learning Network approach is to raise teachers' awareness of careers opportunities in education, in engineering, so that the schools get that culture, that anecdote, that story about pathways into that future careers, because that is the gap. On the whole, I guess most science teachers would have come through a science academic route and know about their own science career pathway and share that quite enthusiastically.
Jen, what's your view?
Yeah, I mean, I feel really passionate about this. Skipton Girls was the first engineering school for girls in the country some 10 years ago. So we've been dedicating absolutely everything to this cause. And I think it's a mindset. Every student in my school experiences engineering, all 820 of them. So from the moment they walk in the door in year 7, they are given that opportunity and that experience. And it's in the mindset of my staff to be offering it to them as well. So we've worked really hard on what STEM means right across the school. STEM isn't just for the science, technology, engineering and maths teachers to own and understand. It's for those English and art and history teachers to have a good comprehension of as well. And you have to work hard at achieving that, I believe. Currently, we're just launching DEC, Design, Engineer, Construct, which is a qualification from Class of Your Own. And that's allowing students from a very early age to understand engineering in the real world. And every student across the school is going to get that opportunity to study that vocational qualification within an academic setting.
Pauline, how unusual is Jen's school in that? And are we...
Probably very unusual.
Are we training teachers to have that culture and to think of these things in a well-rounded way?
Well, I think Jen's school is pretty unusual. I've been to one other school in the last couple of months where engineering is embedded in the curriculum, but not for all. So that notion that you can actually get all children to have an understanding is generally done through a science curriculum and hopefully done through the geography curriculum perhaps as well. I was at a meeting yesterday, an EU meeting, where we had a picture put up of some time-lapse photography. And we all had to work out what it was representing. And it was a room full of scientists, right? And so the person presenting it said, now if students got that, what would they do? And when somebody said, panic, because it wasn't on the syllabus, so they didn't know what it was. And if a scientist got it, what would they do? They would ask a lot of questions to find out.
Yeah.
And if that's what we see in the best of science ed, and I'm sure Brian will back that up, in terms of if you really do see very good questioning, very good asking questions, trying to put pupils into the situation of solving problems, then you start to develop that knowledge, skills and understanding that they need in any situation, particularly engineering. So I think, is Gen School unusual? Yes, but it's not the only one, and so that there's a beacon of hope. But actually we need to see it in the whole of the STEM curriculum, that approach to asking and answering questions, so that young people have the transferable and employment skills they need for the future.
And Pauline, are the teaching schools training that way?
Sorry, say that again?
Sorry.
Teaching. Caroline.
Yeah, no, Pauline.
Caroline.
Even.
You're Carolyn.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry,
I'll pass it off the
I've written
label.
Pauline down twice on my list here. So apologies, Carolyn. Carolyn. Start again. Yeah, are the teaching schools training that way? Or in the end, are we training teachers to get kids to pass tests, and in the end just training teachers to know what they've got to do to get kids to pass tests?
I think it's quite a difficult question to answer in its breadth, because teaching schools now have taken over quite a lot of the brief for training teachers from higher education institutes, and in some cases very successfully. But currently it's quite a complex system, because there are schools direct routes, there are teach first routes, there are skit routes, there are higher ed routes, and there is a mapping process of how recruitment's going. That's just on sheer numbers, not in terms of what's being delivered in the curriculum, and a lot of work's been done on that. But for example, we were talking about science and getting physics graduates to go into teaching in D&T, obviously championing that. It's been less than 50% recruitment for the last 3 years, and this year, this current lot of statistics looks like it's in about 40% of recruitment of what's needed. So you've got to get people to actually come into teaching before you can then start to develop a good career pattern for them. And with D&T in particular, really concerned that STEM is fantastic. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that. But I think engineering and technology are the poor relations. Yeah. And many schools are feeling currently that because of the different accountability measures that are developing, that design and technology and indeed engineering may be too expensive to run and may not be appropriate, may not score sufficient points on accountability measures. So there's a real dilemma at the moment about, is STEM actually maths and science? Because that's the bit that's always mentioned. Or is it indeed engineering and design and technology and computing, which seem to get sidelined? And if schools don't hear that message coming out that STEM is all of that, then they will actually shrink their curriculum in times when money is short and the measures are different. They won't actually need to recruit teachers to D&T if they're not going to run it in their schools, and that would be a terrible shame.
Thank you, Carolyn. And certainly, when you look at, I said 67% for physics under recruiting into training. It's much lower for D&T. That's the catastrophic subject. So, Pepper, from the employer's point of view, what is well-rounded STEM education? What's your view on all of that?
First, I'd like to do a shout-out for geography as well, which, thoroughly enjoyed. I'm going to pick up on, I think, 3 things that would be part of a well-rounded STEM education from an employer point of view, which is, one, that it equips them with practical skills that they're going to need, either for those careers in science, technology, engineering and maths, or in a career in anything else. Because actually what you heard in that video in terms of, wow, this is amazing, I've done something, I've created something, is about, inspiration and inquisitiveness that you're going to need in whatever you do, and which employers are members are looking for in any school leaver, graduate, apprentice, anything like that. So well-rounded, my second one would be that a well-rounded STEM education begins in primary schools. And I think some of the really good stats, Yvonne, that you showed there were about the impact that the CPD has in primary. Because actually some research that we did as an organisation earlier this year showed that by age 11, already you've got a lot of kids who are switched off from science. So actually that's crucial, and particularly in kind of bridging the gap to secondary. And again, some really good evidence that you've got in there, Yvonne, about the impact that it has on collaboration, the CPD, and on working with secondary schools. And I guess finally, a well-rounded STEM education should break down perceptions. I think perceptions about what STEM and science can lead to, So because most people talking about education always involve a personal anecdote. If you were good at science at my school, you went and you were a doctor, because that's what people did. So it's what can it lead to, but also who can do it. And I think particularly, it's why what you guys are doing in Skipton is so good, that there's a perception that it's not for girls. Or there's a perception that it only leads to particular routes. And I think one of the ways that we are, and our members are really keen to kind of break down that perception, is actually to work with schools. And so I think part of that well-rounded education should involve some kind of engagement with employers, but also because there's a benefit on both sides, and there's a sort of CPD benefit for the teachers, but also a lot of our members who are engaged with schools and whose employees are involved, whether as governors or who go in and do practical stuff. It's a benefit and a CPD win for them as well. And actually, I think there's a real win on both sides that we should be more vocal about.
And Mark, from IBM's point of view, do you have a take on this?
Yeah, so I challenged the initial premise of this debate in the first instance. It asks an either-or question. As one of my previous girlfriends always used to come back when I offered her an either-or choice, she used to respond, "Why can't I have both?" So I don't think this is a real question about whether it's a preparation for life or for work. It's preparation for all of those things. Work is part of life. So I think it's a false dichotomy in itself. In terms of what constitutes a well-rounded STEM education, I would take the word STEM out of that. I say what constitutes a well-rounded education, full stop. I would emphasise education and not training. I think we've failed to make a proper distinction between education and training. When I was younger, I think I used to get slightly tired and frustrated with that conversation and that debate and dismiss it as angels dancing on a pinhead, but actually the longer I spend in this space, the more I think it's absolutely critical to distinguish between those two things. I have been party to quite a lot of conversations, part of a working group that was involved in the ill-fated science diploma, where there were a lot of conversation about what constituted the content of the science diploma and what it should be and what it shouldn't be. Frankly, there was no unanimity amongst anybody in those organisations who were represented in those discussions, and I would suggest that the body of knowledge is so great these days that it is impossible to have something that you might describe as representative and broadly balanced. Everybody will have an opinion and a view about this. I'm not sure that it matters. I think the focus on content is not unimportant, but it's probably not the issue. So I think it's much more about inspiring people. It's about the frameworks. I think I'm on the Barack Obama page on this one. It's about developing that spirit of inquiry and inquiry-based learning. Teaching, so I think it's about a set of behaviours and developing a set of tools which young people can then use in whatever direction they go in life.
So
I
Claire,
think science helps deliver that.
do you agree to some extent it's more about pedagogy than it is about content?
Not entirely, no. I think it's about both, actually.
Another false dichotomy.
Yeah,
All tribute to Mark's ex-girlfriend.
I'd like to pick up Yvonne's point about the importance of the kind of the word sustained in terms of the teacher, and then think about that in the context then of your question about the importance or what is a well-rounded STEM education. And I think for me it's also around that linking that importance of sustaining therefore the training for and the provision of updating for teachers, because I think some of the importance around a well-rounded STEM education is in the context of things that are contemporary, relevant and actually interesting. And therefore content, I'd like to take the example of AMR, antimicrobial resistance. That's been a lot on the news over the last year or so, as this is one of the biggest issues facing us as a society. And we've been pushing that message very hard, as has Sally Davis, etc. Then we did a little piece of work to actually say, what do people understand by the term antimicrobial resistance and AMR? And we discovered that actually there was a massive misunderstanding, and what people thought it meant, not surprisingly because of using antimicrobial resistance, they thought maybe that their bodies were becoming resistant in some way, rather than the bacteria and the microbes becoming resistant. So actually we realised there's clearly a role for education here in terms of this is sort of basic content principles, and if we can, and that's really relevant, really contemporary, really interesting and really important. And if we can get those children talking about those things with their teachers, and then children can go back to their families, I think not only are we doing the right thing for children, but actually we're doing the right thing for society more generally. So I think contemporary, relevant and interesting is important. And in that context, I think content and actually the pedagogy, the way it's delivered are both critical.
Thank you. Now, does anyone have anything that they urgently want to say on this bit of this question around well-rounded engineering? We've had a bit about the gender divide around science. Is there anything you want to say about that now before I move on? I've got three, so we'll take these three, starting over here.
My name's Julie Jordan. I was involved with the network right from the beginning and involved with one of the regional science learning centres in Yorkshire and Humber. My question is about what you've just mentioned a little bit really, about this link with contemporary science. When the network was first established, there was a real emphasis on updating teachers with the actual subject they teach. So, you know, whether it is developing a spirit of inquiry and so on. And I think, how do we bridge that gap still in this model in terms of you've got teachers who have to teach a very specified curriculum, but wanting to teach the exciting subjects that you've mentioned and so on in those areas. How do we do that?
Okay, well, let's get all three, and then we'll have a quick response from whoever wants to answer. Yeah, sir.
Sean Reason from the ASC. Mine was sort of picking up on Pippa's point about primary schools, and science for me is as much about creativity and imagination as it is about facts, because a lot of the discoveries in terms of engineering, etc., have been made by trying, failing, trying and failing. And I sometimes think we don't get across that message within perhaps our secondary schools as much as we do sometimes in the best primary schools in the use of imagination and creativity in science. And I just wondered what the panel's views were on that.
Okay.
Hi, Jenny Young from the Royal Academy of Engineering. I'd be interested just in the panel's views alongside teachers. What are your views in terms of effective ways of engaging parents to support the teaching impact, particularly with reference to addressing the perception issues around engineering and technology?
Great. Those are all really interesting. I mean, I've got a whole bunch more that I want to get through. But does anyone want to give a quick response to any of those?
Could I just say on that last one, how to engage parents? I think it's really important. I don't know what the answer is, but maybe we should do a piece of work, actually, to really think that through and understand what is out there, what could be done, what's good practice. Maybe there is work out there that could be shared. But I actually think it's a critical question. I personally haven't thought about it enough, but you mentioning it makes me think it's really something that we should understand better, because that relationship, the child-parent relationship there, is so critical.
I completely agree. You know, because for policymakers, you know, in the end, you want the noise from voters and parents of the voters, and we also want a culture that's more pro-science generally. And if we can get to that through parents, I think that'd be really useful. So, Carolyn, what about this question? The first question we had around, you know, bridging the gap between just getting the subject knowledge enhanced and then the excitement, and, you know,
well, I'd quite
drilling versus thrilling.
I'd quite like to link that question to the primary school question, actually. And that's something, whereas I think there are some issues at the moment around the complexity of the system that I've mentioned before, teaching schools generally are alliances of schools. I mean, in our case, about 30 schools, and there are about nearly 700, I think, teaching schools currently. And they're generally cross-phase, so you actually get opportunities to do the primary-secondary interface better than you perhaps have done in the past, to deliver sessions or get involved in work that actually allows secondary teachers to be perhaps a bit more imaginative and primary teachers to get a little bit more subject knowledge. In terms of updating knowledge, I don't think teaching schools necessarily always can do that themselves, because they'll have areas of expertise. And I think what we have to learn in this complex world is to be able to communicate better between all these different entities that exist, including things like the National Science Learning Centre and STEM and so on. We've got to find ways of actually making sure that schools and teachers understand what's available and where you get the best expertise from. And it may be not on your doorstep, and it may be a virtual way of learning, and it may be a physical thing. And I think if we don't get that right, I'm very conscious of teachers out there who really don't know where to look, because there's almost too much. And it's like a sort of complex Toys R Us supermarket, and they don't know where to start.
Do you think then that we've got the balance right between knowledge acquisition, knowledge creation, technical skill? You know, if that's the holy trinity, is it?
In initial teacher training, or in, you know, when people are actually practicing teachers? Because in initial teacher training, one criticism is that there's often not enough subject knowledge involved. Primary schools, in particular, primary teachers, when they are doing a generic primary course, will only get maybe 6 hours of a foundation subject training, so they'll get 6 hours of modern languages, 6 hours of D&T and so on. That's not a very great start to base your teaching on when you're in a primary school. Secondary school ITT has got more subject content in.
Yep.
But then when you're trained and qualified and you're out in schools, you do need to keep on refreshing your knowledge, particularly in a subject like science or design and technology, where things are changing. History, perhaps things don't change so much other than perspectives on it. And vocabulary in French stays vocabulary in French.
History just gets bigger.
It does get bigger. But in dynamic subjects where there is constant new information coming out there and new thinking, then all teachers need to be able to access that easily. And if you don't have the knowledge, you can't really develop the teaching sufficiently.
Pauline, what do you think?
And that is the point of the National Science Learning Network, is to use all the expertise, many of whom are in this room, or you represent organisations that help give us that access to cutting edge science. So there is some funding that we do, a cutting edge science program. We build it into all of the provision that is available through the network. And some of you heard on the video a little bit more about the TIPS program of actually giving teachers the opportunity to have some embedded time in industry. But we also do other study visits. So we take teachers to CERN as an example. We're setting up visits to other parts, other key research organisations in the country. Not everybody can get out all the time. So we've also built within the National STEM Centre a series of resources that actually enable people to see that cutting edge science and see how they can embed it in their classrooms, and an example of how people who work in those areas where they work. So it's there for teachers. Carolyn's right. It's not, you know, we're a key body to do that, but it is about getting to head teachers as well as teachers to say, it is there. There are conduits. There are places for you to do it, and that's why we need the collaboration of all our partners in this room to keep those messages going out. Where's the best place to come through, and how that can lead to all the other opportunities that you as partners provide as well.
And Jen, you get all that noise, and your colleagues might be a bit worried about Brian breathing down their neck every now and then, and get distracted from hearing those messages. Is there something that we can do better on that?
Well, one of the things I would say, and just to echo what Carolyn's saying, is that I think it's our moral imperative as a teaching school to be working with all those local partners. And I think, the questions that came from the audience that have resonated with me about awe and wonder in the primary classroom that you perhaps don't see in the secondary classroom, and connecting with parents and partnership. I think it's the job of teaching schools to be looking at your local communities and working together and find the best solutions that fit that context. So what works in one teaching school alliance doesn't necessarily, we don't necessarily see it transferred across the country. But I think we can learn a lot from our primary educators. I think we should never presume that they don't know what we think they don't know about primary education. I think some of my secondary colleagues have had some fantastic experiences with them, and looking at transition and building on, and stepping stones, and building the blocks through education. And I think there's lots of opportunities that we need to embrace. But you're right, against the accountability backdrop that we're working in, we're faced with challenges on a weekly basis.
Can you make it easier for her, Brian?
I feel like I'm the wrong
Probably
end of the
not.
stick here, but
My apologies.
the fundamental differences we see is that there's schools that want to get better at science or geography or English or maths, and there's schools that are more concerned about the accountability measures as an end in themselves. And the best schools take Ofsted and DFE targets in their stride. They teach science for understanding and are not that concerned about the content, because they can use any content to illustrate some of the bigger ideas of science. They know how to embed scientific inquiry in the delivery of that content as required by the DFE and by, if you've read it, the opening paragraphs of the National Curriculum for Science as to why teach science. And there's no science teacher on the planet that wouldn't sign up to that vision, except the vast majority haven't read it. And their head teachers haven't read it, and their governing bodies haven't read it. Why teach science? They've gone straight to the what to teach, and they've got stuck at that point. So it is a culture thing about wanting to teach scientific inquiry and then providing the time and resources and training to make sure that it is done through inquiry, through excitement, through the phenomena itself excites kids. There's no problem motivating kids to enjoy science. Just look down a microscope for the first time, burn magnesium for the first time. It doesn't take much to maintain curiosity, apart from a permission culture in the school to do it.
And
he says passionately, by the way.
And it
that's
feels
missing.
like we, as a system, value the knowledge acquisition much more than the creation and the technical skill. Is that unfair?
It's partly because that's easier to measure.
Yeah.
Except when you come to employers, who then value the skills of acquiring that knowledge more than the knowledge itself. And we haven't got a way yet. If you want an accountability system to make teachers teach it properly, I think you're doomed to failure anyway. You should make the moral imperative of teachers wanting to teach it through inquiry, actually, part of their duty as science teachers to teach that way. But at the end of the day, if the accountability system is going to be the thing that make them do it, then it's going to have to measure their soft skills. And at the moment it doesn't do it. It just measures the bits that's easy to do with the can you remember who invented gravity question, not can you apply your knowledge in the solving of this problem. Because assessing it that way is very expensive. I did reflect the other day, sorry to go on here, but the further up you get up the academic chain, the simpler the examination system becomes. So at the top of it, if that's the right phrase, a PhD, you get it or you don't. There's no grading of a PhD so far as I know. Mind you, it's very expensive assessing it. Several people have to read the thesis and then grill the poor soul that wrote it at the end to see if they really understood what they've discovered. At the other end of the spectrum, how many grades we're heading for at GCSE now? 9, 10? Potty. But that's because you can bung them into numbers and then pretend the difference between 85% and 87% is matters.
So I'm now, I'm now interested in just exploring a bit more what teachers need to get to be able to deliver the well-rounded STEM education that we've been talking about. What more can employers do, Pippa?
So I think there's a few really good examples of things that are being done. I think to your point about the imagination and resilience and creativity being needed, I think that's absolutely right, and that is what our members value, as well as the kind of the measurements of the hard skills. And I think one thing that we would like to see in time is actually some way of measuring a bit of that soft skill, those valuable character aspects in the education system, because it feels a little bit unfair to those on the front line to be criticised for not doing something if the system that they're being measured against isn't asking that of them. And I imagine just also to stick up for my colleague on the right, that they probably haven't had time to read the science curriculum if they haven't, because they've been doing one or two other things as well. And I think things that employers can do, I think can support the kind of parental engagement, because I think that's absolutely crucial. And we did some work a few years ago that sort of kicked off our kind of the CBI's education campaign, which talked about, I think, the sort of the value of good parental engagement in education is worth about 2 years in terms of sort of that could put you 2 years ahead of some of your classmates. And that's also a way of countering some of the it's not sort of where you are or who you are, it's what your parents did and where you're from, which kind of determines which determines the outcomes that people have. So I think there's a few things that that employers can do. I think they can encourage their employees, many of whom are also parents, to get engaged with their local schools. And actually, a lot of our members, they might be governors, they might be involved on multi-academy trust boards. They need a bit of flexibility for that in terms of time, maybe time taken off to do that.
And
but
there's 500,000 qualified teachers who aren't teaching in this country. Quite a few of them will be working for your members.
Yep, absolutely.
We could use that. They're an extraordinary resource if we deploy them.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, an understanding of which we have.
Off we go.
Under your pre-government,
Yep.
IBM and a number of other employers set up a program called Transition to Teaching
Yes.
to encourage people to transition from private sector employers into teaching. It cost about £5 million, so it wasn't a cheap scheme. Before it was summarily closed down by the incoming administration at that time, we had recruited over 500 people to transition into teaching careers in the STEM sector. So I think the point is very well made, and I think we need to revisit that. It shouldn't be a party political issue, quite frankly. The need is currently so great that we have to go there. We had 1,700 employers, I think, signed up as supporters of that. And it is an intensive process. If you have been working in the commercial sector or an industry for quite a number of years, whether or not you've trained as a teacher originally, making that transition is a tough choice, and it's certainly not an easy option. And part of the process, one of the reasons why it costs £10,000 per person to transition them, was because they needed an awful lot of support and guidance and top-up training and all sorts of other things before they were even prepared to begin to make that move and undertake the qualifying
It strikes
training.
me that we took TIPS was mentioned.
Yeah, TIPS is fantastic.
But if you're going to take a teacher out of the classroom, you've got to get some supply, and that's expensive. Now, if we could twin some of those people who are currently working outside of education, but who are trained teachers, and get them to come out and do a bit of teaching again instead of getting in supply, and just forge a bit more of a relationship. It just seems interesting.
And similarly, just in addition to those kind of the things that are either very time intensive in terms of tips or taking people from one career to another, it's about the expertise that both can bring. So some of our members, Siemens for example, produce online learning resources for Key Stage 2 and above. People going into schools to sort of do the sort of one-off kind of flashbang roadshow type things, and I think it's about encouraging that.
How many of you are teachers? Put up your hand if you're a teacher. So tell me what you need to deliver a well-rounded STEM education. I've got a woman at the back. Weren't you in the video?
I was, yes.
Yeah, you did a
I'm
great job.
Eleanor from, thank you. Eleanor from Skipton Girls, previously head of science, now in a new role as STEM innovation. What teachers need is they need experience, they need enthusiasm, they need the chance to practice, they need the opportunity to take risks. And when you've been teaching for a while, you have that wealth of experience. But because we've got a problem with teacher retention, we get used in our exam classes 11, 12, 13, where we put to good use, and we don't get in at Key Stage 3, which is when we're really needed to show them how amazing our subject is. Because it's really, really difficult when you've got a disillusioned Year 11 who knows exactly, has already decided what their career pathway is, the relevance of STEM. So for me, trying to give support to my younger colleagues, many of whom are non-specialists in their subjects, and give them that hook to pass on to the students so they suddenly get that light bulb moment is key. And that's an awful lot of what we have worked with the Science Learning Partnership to do and continue to do so. And for me, it's going to continue to be a big problem until we manage to solve the problem of specialist teacher recruitment and get those passionate people in at Key Stage 3 to really switch on and carry on the enthusiasm that most primary school children come to us with.
Great. I want to come back to the panel and have a discussion about recruitment and retention in a minute, but let's hear from this gentleman here.
Ian McLeod, I'm a head of science faculty at the School of North. I've got this...
You've got this microphone coming into your hand.
I've got this problem that's been going around in my head for quite a while about the government has got a massive focus on the STEM agenda, but are accountability measures that are changing in schools actually stifling the STEM agenda? Like there's a higher priority on humanities and languages as far as EBAC subjects as there are for technology and engineering. So there's a bit of a conflict going on there, I think. And I just wonder what people feel about that comment.
Okay, we'll come back for that. Any other thoughts about what you need? Yes, sir.
It's probably what you need. I mean, I was delighted to hear what Brian said, and I look forward to that. A lot of what he said becoming Ofsted policy in the near future. And a lot of people have talked about excitement and of teaching and inquiry and investigation. And I just wonder that, you know, as the uniqueness of science as an intellectual discipline is about mental models and proposing hypotheses and then testing them and so on and so forth, I just wonder how can everybody in this room help to ensure that investigative skills continue, expensive as they are, to have a high priority in schools when Ofqual has determined that practical skills will not form any part of any GCSE or A-level exam grade, which to me suggests that schools are in grave danger of going down the road of doing less and less exciting investigative work.
A good question. Any more just while we're at it? Fine, good. You all want to hear the answer to that question, don't you? So we've got two questions here. One is about whether or not there is an EBAC conflict and whether that's just reprioritising things away from STEM. And then the second is how can we get the joy and the whiz-bang of investigatory science when there's no incentive around practicals from Ofqual. Any takers?
So I just wanted to respond to this question of science versus humanities. Again, in my opening comments, I talked very deliberately about a well-rounded curriculum, full stop. I don't think it's either or. I think, again, it's a false dichotomy. I think if we're going to embed an enthusiasm, a passion, a commitment to STEM activity, if we're going to help people in the society understand the impacts and engage with the impacts of STEM on their lives, then actually we need people to be able to articulate and inspire and enthuse and motivate and and be able to tell the story. So actually it's not one or the other, it's both. You have to have that well-rounded overall balance if we're going to move this agenda forward. And if you talk to humanities people, they will equally complain, if it was in a similar forum, about the undue focus and attention of the government on STEM education. So,
and that's before you get the creative subjects. Claire, what do you think?
And I'd just like to share a little statistic that our education team here has uncovered around, it comes to your point about STEM, and concerns particularly at the primary level that STEM perhaps is no longer getting the sort of attention that it deserves. So over the summer we did a little exercise and looked at all the Ofsted reports that came out in 2014, and 73% of the primary school Ofsted's report don't mention the word science once. And we think that's a real problem, actually. And in contrast, 100% of them mentioned the word mathematics. And so I think there is an issue that we need to address in terms of, what matters where. And, I don't think Ofsted can do everything, but Ofsted is an incredibly important body. So there is, there's the kind of the stick and the carrot. And I'm sorry to say, Ofsted is a bit of a stick. But if it's used well, it can be a helpful one. I mean, I think there is the other thing I'd just like to say, actually, and it's coming back to CPD. I think every teacher, every head, and actually we haven't mentioned the governing bodies in school, every governor of a school ought to really care and value professional development, and there ought to be a clear plan for subject-specific professional development at every level, and the governing board ought to be checking that. And we know, once again, that not everyone does.
Do you think there should be a requirement for every... in the US, for example, you have to recertify through CPD. A lot of other professions you do. Do you think that's something we should do here?
I think and the talk now of a Royal College of Teaching, actually, I think it ought to be within the context of the profession doing it to itself, as it were, and that it comes from within. but many other professions do that and require that. And so I think as it is a profession growing and building around, you know, professional development and career pathways, etc., I think that's something that the profession should look at really seriously.
So I've taken the attention away from you, Brian, but if you want to come back on Ofsted, that's fine. But does anyone disagree about a certification process and a mandation of CPD?
I think it's really important. You know, I think CPD is absolutely vital, but it's also facing a budget related, you know, period of time where most CPD is quite expensive because most of it runs during the day, during working day, so there are cover implications as well as the cost of whatever you're accessing. And I won't say this for my own school because we are heavily investing in CPD and through the teaching school doing the same thing. But I know of many schools, and primaries in particular, with small budgets, where their entire budget for the school CPD for all their staff is about £1,000. And that's effectively, it's like almost one course, one day for one person plus their travel. So if we mean that we think CPD is really important, we've got to find ways of actually investing in it. And although it's back to schools to do that, with shrinking budgets, where do we find that money from? I think we're getting smarter at doing it. When schools deliver their own sort of CPD, that can be very effective and cost effective, but it isn't necessarily exposing you to the breadth of experience you get if you go to more nationally related courses and expertise from outside.
Pauline, you must have a strong view on this.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of the research shows that actually much of the CPD that happens in school, where it's generic, is not long-term effective.
Yep.
We've got evidence from both the TDT recent report, and we've got the evidence from the Eurydice Teaching Profession in Europe 2015 report, which actually is really clear that it is the subject-specific CPD that makes a difference, and that it's that mixture between subject content knowledge and pedagogical knowledge and embedding the two together that makes a difference. But interestingly, the European one is actually quite clear in that it's what people perceive to be CPD and therefore what they think counts of it. So one of the things that they said was most effective was teachers collaborating, and we heard earlier this morning teachers saying, well, yes, if you have an online course, it's not about 30 teachers sitting with headphones listening to it. It's actually about 30 teachers sitting around together using that online opportunity to actually take their learning forward. So we have to, as a community, be really smart about the CPD we offer and the ways in which we offer. So chips can actually be done in the holidays. It doesn't have to take people out of a classroom. But we also have to have that acknowledgement from parents, from the community at large, from teachers, from head teachers, that actually you're not going to progress as a school unless you have an embedded culture of learning, because the best teachers are learners. And unless you find ways of embedding that in your culture of your school and your parents and your governors, then that's not going to take that forward. So we need to continue that process as a community.
I would just say in passing that at TES, where we just started with 6 online peer-to-peer PD courses. One is sort of general professional studies, outstanding teaching. The rest are all subject-based. One of them is primary science. Primary science is the one that has had the least take-up. And so just offering it clearly isn't enough.
No, it's how you entice people into it and how you help them see their way through it.
There was a hand bend. Yeah.
Hi, Peter Feingold from the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. I'm just interested in the narrative about CPD that remains over the 10 years or so since this initiative has began, and that is that CPD is individually focused and is a luxury for the individual teacher, rather than it being something which benefits the institution. And actually, it's not just an entitlement. Yvonne's presentation of the impact of CPD is so persuasive that why is the narrative still running along the lines of the fact that it's something that benefits individuals? And we at the institution have done some back of the envelope calculations to work out that there's £1 trillion worth of professional capital in our teaching profession in all 4 nations of the UK if it was £1 trillion over a 40-year period, if it was a £1 trillion worth of plant that's being invested in, I'm sure the maintenance would be a lot more than the amount that's actually being spent at the moment. So, so really, I suppose the panel's perspective on how do we shift the emphasis away from it being something which is, you know, you have to beg for, to something that you should really be doing and want to do, whether it's mandatory or not.
Thank you. So in answering that, because we should wrap this conversation up in about 5 minutes, I think. Is that right? 5 or 10 minutes, fine. Jen, let me start with you, because in the report it talks about the retention effect of CPD, and that plays to an institutional gain on top of the individual gain. Do you?
Yeah, I mean,
what's the reality?
Yeah, I mean, the reality for me, I mean, again, looking at my fellow head at the end of the table here, it is about the vision that you set out as a school leader, and that vision being consistent and equitable and fully inclusive across your organisation. For me, it's about high bar, sustained and consistent CPD. So it's not that you're just dropping something in at one point in time. It has to be all-inclusive right across the whole academic year and beyond. It has to be self-led. You have to want to do it. It's about getting the individual teachers to own it for themselves. And I think typically we've had a lot of done to CPD over the years. And what's refreshing about the Science Learning Partnership work, certainly in my organisation, is that staff understand what they need to develop for themselves and then go out and own it for themselves and put time and energy into making it work for themselves. But fundamentally, I think the change needs to happen in the training years, in the BEds, in the ITT years. It's about getting the messages absolutely sharpened in terms of your responsibility as a teacher to be continuously developing from the day you start to the day that you stop learning, or hang up your shoes if you like. And I think that's where there needs to be some fundamental shifts in the mindset of some professionals, not all, but some professionals within the teaching profession.
Karen?
Yeah, I would actually totally agree with that, Jen, and also say that the ITT current training, no matter which provider, is very much about it being at the beginning of a long sort of programme of professional development and responsibilities with you. I mean, when I look back to doing my PGCE, however long ago that was, really, you did it, you qualified, and then maybe you went somewhere that actually valued CPD, and maybe you didn't. But now most of the students, the ITT students, are building up portfolios of evidence. They're very much more research-oriented. They are doing master's credits as part of that with a view to continuing on past their actual PGC qualifications. So I think we're getting that bit better. I think there are some really, really good examples of the way schools either on their own or collaboratively work together and encourage the best CPD, and some of them are fully aware of what's out there. Now, for example, I knew about the Science Learning Centre, I hadn't been there, and then I went up to visit, and I wish I'd been there a long time ago, because when I realised what was there, physically there, I was full of enthusiasm, and I don't think a lot of head teachers are actually perhaps exposed to what's out there as much as they could be. And we've got to find ways of actually communicating that better. And so that the very best practice that's out there for schools is being shared much more widely. And we're making better use of what's already there, really good opportunities that are already out there.
A year ago, I got the results of some YouGov research into CPD that I commissioned. And we found, the headlines were, teachers really wanted it. And they wanted it in order to be better teachers, not to get more money and progress their career or to get through Ofsted, but for all the right reasons. 12% of secondary schools didn't have a budget for CPD. There was a consistent picture which wasn't quite as rosy as that. And obviously the existing provision broadly they didn't think was good enough, which might also suggest why 12% of secondary schools weren't spending anything on it if they couldn't find anything that they thought was worth buying. But I think there are some fundamental issues that we still have to solve. And I think David Weston's group that he's been charged with government to convene and report, I think by April, on CPD is really, really important.
Absolutely. Having some standards of what effective CPD is, and I think what we're trying to do in this impact report is show that effective CPD has to have real tangible outcomes, both on teacher development and on pupil outcomes. Because without that, you know, you've got to ask why. And I think one of the other things that we know clearly is that it affects retention. I mean, there's the work we've done, but the Eurydice report also is very clear that retention of teachers and attraction to teachers is the fact that they will be more attracted to the profession and stay in it if they get this continual learning process. That yes, they have to take responsibility. Yes, some of it has to be individual, some of it has to be school, and there has to be that mixture. So I think it is about making sure that whatever they are involved in, it is about head teachers understanding that notion of effective CPD, what is making an impact and how you measure it. And I think that's one of the key things that we have to move away from just provision and how much it costs to how much it costs not to do it.
Yeah.
In terms of losing staff, in terms of ineffective staff, in terms of lack of outcomes for pupils.
And I would just quickly add, seeing as we're in the business of challenging the premise of the question, it's just not an either or, is it? It's something that benefits the individual, also benefits the organisation.
Yeah, completely.
I could just say, I mean, I so much agree with Pauline and what's been said about the need for embedding it in Peter's comment. And I think it's so critical, because actually we've been in a bit of a honeymoon period, you know, since National Science Learning Centre opened. You know, we've got, you know, Wellcome's been very generous, government's been very generous, and actually Wellcome has worked well with government. We've got some wonderful industry money in, but this is a very unusual model, and it's, you know, we've managed to hold it together for 10 years. You know, we might well hold it together, say, for another 5. But we can't necessarily keep holding it together. You know, it's about key individuals that have really been committed to this. And, you know, people move on, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know, I think there needs to be a much better, longer-term solution to this. We're showing it works. We're showing it's important. We're showing it's important for the nation, for the individual, you know, for society, for the school, et cetera, et cetera. And so how can we actually put in place a much better sustainable model long-term? And I think that's the biggest question that we've got to sort out over the next few years.
And without wanting to depress anyone, yesterday I was at a meeting that Sam was at, and Sam Friedman, who was an advisor to Michael Gove and is now working for Teach First, represented a presentation that he'd done at the Research Ed conference a couple of weeks ago, in the course of which he talked a bit about the CSR pressure and at least an 8% cut in 5 to 16 education funding, and at least a 25% cut in early years and post-16 funding. So within that context of quite a lot less money, so that's 3 billion out of 5 to 16, and that's 14 billion, he said, out of early years and 11 and post-16. So in that context, this has got to stand up and still have a future. And, you know, the need for us to communicate really strongly the importance of this, the way this is solving problems, it's not just another pressure, cannot be more pronounced than it is at the moment. So last 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. Has anyone got any final reflections from the floor or from the panel? Sam?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Carolyn was saying about the join-up between IT and CPD. I had the privilege of being on the Carter Review this time last year, and I'm now just about to join the expert behaviour panel for ITE. So I've got a bit of an insight into this, and I completely agree with some of what you said in terms of the system beginning to really get that better in terms of that join-up, but also to put a bit of kind of note of caution into it as well, in that through the review we saw the best and the worst, I think. And we saw some really great examples of where, particularly through things like School Direct and new skits, that joining up is really happening. But also, ironically, through the same thing, both school-led and HEI-led models of ITE, where the opposite is happening, because subjects are becoming so dispersed that the subject knowledge focus can't be there, either in ITE or in professional development. And there is a danger that this school-led system, which I really thoroughly support, is in some cases quite a fragmented, quite fragile thing, that the lack of a middle tier I think is kind of compounding that problem. And I think it'd be interesting to know if the Science Learning Network can do something about that and get that joining up between ITE and CPD a bit more systematic, particularly in STEM, obviously. Because there's a gap there that in some cases really good teaching school alliances and multi-academy trusts are filling, but it's not across the board. There's quite a lot of big gaps in certain parts of the country that I worry might not get filled if we're not careful.
Thank you. Any other brief final comments from anyone? Gentleman over there.
Hello, David from the Institute of Physics. I have a multiple choice question which is deeply unfashionable. So we've all been convinced about the value of subject-specific CPD and the impact it can have, and I'm picking up really on Claire's last comment about the future in terms of where funding models may go. And a question really for the whole panel, or however many we have time for, what do they think would be the ideal model for funding CPD in the longest term, whether it's the individual teacher in their pocket or the school and their budget or sponsors, bursaries or government itself, so that it's all free at the point of delivery, as it were. It all ultimately comes from somewhere. So I was just wondering what the ideal model would be, and whether there's differences of views.
Okay, so we're going to start with you, Pippa, because it's just easiest to work towards me. You've got any final words that you want to make on anything to do with this, but in the course of which, tell us, A, is the best model of funding the individual, B, the school, C, sponsorship, or from employers, obviously, D, government bursaries.
I'm going to start with that one and give a little bit of a politician's answer, which is probably a little bit of everything. Because generally a one-size-fits-all model isn't going to work in terms of the subjects and even just the four in the acronym STEM in terms of what's needed, and the range of institutions and individuals on which it affects. So I'm going to take the politician's answer. And just in terms of the sort of, just to sort of wrap up, you've been going 10 years. 10 years ago, Facebook hadn't been launched, just been launched, but the iPhone hadn't been. And I think that is sort of encapsulates for me the scale of the challenge, but also the opportunity.
Jen?
Teachers work incredibly hard to improve the life chances of young people across this country. I think it's the responsibility of schools and the government to have the right incentives out there for those teachers to support them in their professional development. I wouldn't be asking my teachers to put their hand in their pocket.
I'm going to say B, schools, but properly funded to do so. And I'm also going to say, picking up that 10-year point, I think it's really exciting, actually. This is a great success story, a great 10-year success story, and I think everyone who's really put so much into it ought to have a really big party. I see that the 1st of November is actually on a Sunday, so maybe not on the 1st of November, but nonetheless, I think in November we should celebrate it, because actually...
You've got a great venue for a party here.
Have it here. Maybe we can have it here. And that, because actually, when you talk to people in other countries, this is also the envy of other countries, and so we actually have to recognise we've got to celebrate it as well.
Thank you.
And picking that up, I was with representatives of 36 countries yesterday on STEM education, and their mouths just drop open when they hear what we have here. So I think the partnership that we've got here at the moment, which is schools putting what they can into it, it is government putting what they can into it, it is industry putting what they can into it, and it is a lot of people putting a lot of energy and effort in that is also going to make the difference. So I'm going to go for that mixed model, please. And can we have it free at point of entry? No, definitely not. Because the one thing we know is people value having to make an effort and having to make a commitment. So let's keep that commitment, let's keep that partnership.
Brian?
Absolutely. It is working, this. It is making a huge difference to outcomes for young people in science, but not enough schools know it is, and not enough schools want it to. So that is my suggestion. Make sure everybody recognises what is working.
Thank you, Mark.
I think we need to recognise that the teaching profession is not in a unique position on this issue. This applies across all sectors of our economy. So there is a standard curve of distribution for engagement and investment in CPD within all employers, I think. And there are some good employers who do it really well, who are creative and imaginative about it and resource it well. And some of those are represented in this room. At the other end, there are employers who feel that for whatever reason they can't afford to do it, or they don't see it as adding value to what they do. So there is a pretty standard curve of distribution on this, I think. Therefore, I think the way to shift the balance and shift the needle is a combination of an organisation, a government-resourced but schools-led approach to delivering this. And then the last thing I want to say, not related to that, but in terms of teacher supply, please can we stop this nonsense about only encouraging people with a 2-1 or a first into the teaching profession. If we want to increase our teacher supply, what I really want to see are teachers who have enough knowledge but also the ability to inspire and who are passionate about the subject. I think they will do more for advancing the cause of STEM than having a first. And finally, Karen.
Probably mixed economy, but with a heavier weighting on schools. Maybe schools need to have some ring-fence elements for CPD, because when budgets get tight, that does get squeezed. So maybe that needs to happen. In terms of Sam's comments over there about ITT, I'm glad you won the Carter Review. I agree there's some really good examples and very poor examples, and what we've got to do with the teaching schools is actually work across that with higher ed as well to get the very best that we can and share the best and actually quality assure each other till we get the best opportunities. There are some subjects, for example, I know I'm talking about D&T, but there are some subjects where so many of the HEI departments for D&T have closed down that the expertise is very spread about and hard to come by. So that's an issue. What we can also do, though, the Teaching Schools Council is meeting today, and I'm going over to that in a minute, is we have a group of SLEs, Specialist Leaders of Education, all across the country in every subject. And we are not using them to the best of our ability yet. And we need to develop that so that those people can access, sometimes they can access training that can be shared in a more effective way on a local basis. So we've just got to be very much smarter about what we do, and we've got to communicate better and be prepared to challenge each other. Because if it is a school-led system and you're going to have reduced funding, but you're going to keep the money that there is in the school system, you've got to use it well. You've got to be much more out of the box in the way you use that money. You've got to barter with each other in terms of time, not necessarily in money. You've got to access things from outside and find ways of funding that collaboratively. It's a big ask, and the Teaching Schools Council, that's their big agenda item really this afternoon, is how mature is the system? Can it cope with what's being asked of it? And that's across the board, not just in STEM, but obviously in terms of STEM, that's a major area for thinking about.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for your contributions. Thank you to our panel, Carolyn, Mark, Brian, Pauline, Claire, Jen and Pippa. Thank you very much.